Good afternoon and welcome to the Church of St. Paul the Apostle. My name is Father Rick Walsh. The Paulist fathers have been in this church since its founding in 1858. This particular building before us was built in 1885, so we're very proud of the musical heritage that we're sharing now with you all from our early days. As you are here, I invite you to follow along with the program you were given on your entrance and join me now in prayer. May the Holy One of Mercy, the God of all consolation, be with you. Almighty and faithful Creator, all is graced and made whole in your presence. All people are shaped in your image. We now entrust the soul of Chester to you. In your infinite wisdom and compassion, you have welcomed Chester into the light, embraced in your love. Console the hearts of those who love him in the hope that all who trust in you will find peace and rest in your presence. We ask this in your name, O God. Amen. And now we join. I invite us now to be seated as we listen to beautiful words from Paul's first letter to the Corinthians.
If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all I have, and if I deliver my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. Love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful. It is not arrogant or rude. Love does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrong, but rejoices in the right. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. As for prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will pass away. For our knowledge is imperfect, and our prophecy is imperfect. But when the perfect comes, the imperfect will pass away. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part. Then I shall understand fully, even as I have been fully understood. So faith, hope, love abide, these three, but the greatest of these is love.
And as a response to that those beautiful words from St. Paul, we have now a reading of Psalm 131.
O Lord, my heart is not lifted up. My eyes are not raised too high. I do not occupy myself with things too great and too marvelous for me, but I have calmed and quieted my soul, like a child quieted at its mother's breast. Like a child that is quieted is my soul. O Israel, hope in the Lord from this time forth and forevermore.
I hail from the Boston area of Massachusetts. As the youngest of 7 with 22 years between the oldest and myself, I came to know a little bit about music through my brother, who at the time was in college at the Northeastern University in Boston. And he had a big collection of these albums of the great music on the planet, or some title like that. And it was all this wonderful classical music that I played over and over on my little tiny 45 RPM kind of record player I had, a little portable case with a horrible little speaker. But I grew familiar with tunes that I came later to understand to be these amazing symphonic tunes from Tchaikovsky, Brahms, Schubert, and the like. It wasn't until I went to college myself that I recovered some interest in classical pieces. And what brought it about for me was my working at a local institution in Boston near my school at the time was the University of Massachusetts, and the Boston campus was the Kennedy Library, the presidential library that was open the year I started college. And through that association, I came to acquire, again at the time, a record LP of the funeral mass of Robert Francis Kennedy that was celebrated here in New York at St. Patrick's Cathedral in 1968, this month of June. And in it was this haunting piece of classical music that I played over and over. I came to find out, of course, through the record and more study, that it was Gustav Mahler's Fifth Symphony, the fourth movement called the Adagio. And I came to love it so much, I got all the Deutsche Grammophon records I could of Mahler's, which made me seem rather erudite when I went to the seminary, when my classmates were pretty impressed that I had a collection of Mahler with Georg Scholti of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra conducting. But what I loved about that particular piece, and I still to this day love, was the remarkable dissonance that is present in his music, in Mahler's music. Dissonance in our culture is something we don't like, right? It's this arguments, it's this disagreeing all the time, and boy, is our world full of that. But what musical dissonance brings to us is that depth of what seems to be something contrary and in disagreement coming together to paint a picture in our minds of some incident in life or of a favorite memory. And I think of that today with music, because oftentimes we think of harmony in music and how beautiful music is, and of course it is, and of course it's harmonious. But I think it's the dissonance, that sense of something happening in a piece that again is more poetic and lifts me up and lifts you up a little higher. Particularly with this one piece of music I'm remembering, there is, as you may know from hearing it yourself, I'm going to presume many of you are much more musically inclined than I, but it's that adagio where there's a great crescendo of strings that rise and keep peaking and keep, just when you think it's gone as high as it can, it keeps going, only to then crack. And there's this amazing mix of strings that come together, and you can almost sense a leaf on the top of a tree letting go of its twig and gently rocking and twirling and bringing itself painfully, slowly to its final rest on the ground. there's something to this that I believe is so important in what people like Chester have given to us in the musical field. This ability to take what our culture cannot do well in words, ability to transcend words, and bring what may even be conflict into a sense of a greater picture, purpose. That even with a leaf, if it is that image I had of falling to the ground, that would be death, we know it's not. That it's that leaf that will join millions of other leaves to produce the humus, the earth, the dirt, from which will spring forth new life. We need this gift of music today in our lives. I'm so grateful that you're here, folks, from the Canterbury Chorale, because you're bringing to us, as Chester did with you, that beautiful bigger picture that our world needs so much today. The ability to transcend the mundane, the disagreements, where everything gets politicized, to be lifted up. Even if it's in sadness, we're still lifted in that sadness. So I give thanks to God today that Chester Lane lives on in the gift of music today, the gift of music tomorrow, that we listen to and perhaps participate in and help bring about for a world that is so much in need of musical dissonance as well as harmony.
Good afternoon, everyone. Just let me mention I had a recent bout of COVID. I've tested negative, but I mention this because I have a bit of a cough and I hope it won't interrupt me. So if it does, please bear with me. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, friends of Chester, family of Chester. It's a beautiful day, in fact, a day when I might be headed to the tennis courts to play with Chester, as we so often did. We're here today to remember our dear friend Chester Lane. I didn't know Chester at Harvard. We met soon after he arrived in New York City in the 1990s for his job at Symphony Magazine, which moved, as many of you know, from Washington to New York back then, and where he served with distinction as an editor for so many years. I was attending a concert at the old Steinway Hall. I was relieved. I'd wanted to check and see if it's still there because, it was knocked down. The building was knocked down for one of these mega towers. And fortunately, it's still there within the new building. Anyhow, I was seated there with a friend to my left and a fellow I didn't know to my right. And within 5 minutes, we discovered we were Harvard classmates. So that was the beginning of our friendship. Back then, by the way, Harvard men outnumbered Radcliffe women about 6-1, so there were many Harvard people we never encountered when we were in school. And I heard from Marianne that somebody here in attendance today is another classmate, so I hope we'll meet later. Chester's and my love of classical music connected us, and for months after, he was kind enough to invite me, among others, to some of the many concerts for which he was comped tickets. Chester was so knowledgeable, generous, and modest. I enjoyed learning from him. Occasionally, something a bit unusual might happen, given being in the press section. I recall the time we exited Carnegie Hall via the press entrance, and the coat of a very well-known celebrity whose name shall not be mentioned exited in front of me and somehow got entangled in my handbag, leading to a very embarrassing few moments as we disentangled. So things like that occasionally would happen, but mostly what would happen was attending a concert with Chester indoors at one of the many New York venues or in Central Park. It often led to mixing with some of the many music world figures that he knew, which was always interesting. Chester also back then, and I think ongoingly, gave generously of his time to a women's shelter and to other causes that he cared about here in New York and beyond. And then Chester met Marianne, and his life really blossomed. I met her not long after they started seeing each other and appreciated right away how complementary they were, how good for each other. I attended their friendly and heartfelt wedding and reception here on the Upper West Side, where I often had the pleasure of running into them, actually as I did just a few days before Chester passed away. And I can still picture that moment. It was on their corner in front of their building. And I will cherish it as it reminds me of what was so lovely about their partnership and my connection to them. It was a great pleasure at the beginning of their relationship and ever since to share as a friend in the life they built with their friends and colleagues, many of you here today, by keeping abreast of Marianne's achievements as she built her artist management business, how Chester supported her in that and became more involved over the years, their interesting travels in the U.S. and abroad. Then there was the Canterbury Choral Society, which we're fortunate to hear today, and with which Chester sang and where he became very involved, as many of you know. Attending many of their concerts, I always enjoyed, which were wonderful, I always enjoyed meeting Chester and Marianne after to congratulate him on a wonderful performance. Chester and Marianne joined me occasionally for events at the Harvard Club of New York, and sometimes they were there because Marianne's own artists were performing memorably. Chester had told me that when he was a child, his father had been a member of the Harvard Club, and he recounted memories of visiting there with him. Chester did tell me about his namesake father, who played a significant role, as many of you know, in mid-20th century political events, and about his interesting family and their wonderful place on Cape Cod. I'm very glad that I'll be meeting more of you here this evening. Over the years here in New York, I've had the pleasure of meeting two of his children and was fortunate to get to know Hannah and then Brent and their children because they live here. So sometimes I visited with them and Chester and Marianne, that is, and family and friends at 230 Central Park West on a holiday or a special occasion, and it was always a great pleasure. They were so warm and hospitable. Chester's happiness at seeing his children grow up and do well and have their own children was very palpable. Finally, I must mention the very many, I alluded to tennis. There was a big enthusiasm for Chester and myself, some other friends here. I must mention the many enjoyable times over the years that I had with Chester and our other tennis friends at the courts in Central Park. For those unfamiliar with that little New York City tennis paradise, it's just north of the reservoir, and there are 26 clay courts run very well by our Parks Department from April to November, and enjoyed by thousands of New Yorkers and visitors each year. And that included Chester, me, and other of our friends. From our mostly weekend games, Chester, living so close by and also being an early riser, often was kind enough to get up at the crack of dawn to reserve a court for our group. He was a very good player, playing since childhood, and he had a wicked backhand slice, and almost always faked you out. That gives backspin and the ball bounces back away from you running to meet it. He involved Marianne in the rare moments when she had the time. I don't know if tennis ever really took with her, but I know she was interested in learning at one point. And on the courts in between play, we caught up with events of the day, with politics, with music, and more. We all enjoyed Chester's honest and thoughtful take on many issues, and his quirky sense of humor on the courts and elsewhere. At the end of a game, almost always, that saw me biking back to our respective apartments, he on West 83rd and me a little further south on West 79th. We'd turn off on 83rd, I'd drop Chester off and head on. Coincidentally, my building also has the number 230, just one of those little quirks of fate. Some years in the summer, there were wonderful gatherings on Chester and Marianne's rooftop for his tennis circle, and I'm sure for other friends as well. And it's fitting that we'll gather there today, this lovely afternoon, in his memory. Chester loved Marianne. He loved his children and family, his friends. He loved music and singing, Cape Cod, his time at Harvard, his years in Washington. I do not presume to know all that was in his heart. He was an excellent and lively companion in music, tennis, and other gentle adventures, wonderful parent and friend, and that is what remains with one. I was privileged to know him, one of the most kind, moral, unpretentious people I will ever encounter. It's difficult to believe and accept that Chester is gone. I'm sure many of us feel that. Occasionally I catch myself thinking, maybe he's available for a tennis game this weekend. To Marianne, to all of Chester's friends and family here today and listening in, may we always warmly cherish the memory of Chester and his friendship.
I'm going to be reading on behalf of Corey, who could not be here today. Into the twilight. Outworn heart, in a time outworn, come clear of the nets of wrong and right. Laugh, heart, again in the gray twilight. Sigh, heart, again in the dew of the morn. Your mother, Era, is always young, dew ever shining and twilight gray, though hope fall from you and love decay, burning in fires of a slanderous tongue. Come, heart, where hill is heaped upon hill, for there the mystical brotherhood of sun and moon and hollow and wood and river and stream work out their will. And God stands winding his lonely horn, and time and the world are ever in flight, and love is less kind than the gray twilight, and hope is less dear than the dew of the morn.
Chester was a kind, generous, supportive, reliable friend. He was bright and talented, with a witty sense of humor. I feel certain that all of you here today felt these qualities in your individual relationships with Chester. I would like to describe how these qualities showed forth in the way that I knew him best, as a friend and housemate in a group house in Washington, D.C. that we all affectionately called Pooh Place, in honor of Winnie the Pooh. Chester came to live with us as he was working in Washington, D.C. and with one of the Ralph Nader research and advocacy groups. In addition to myself, I am joined here by three other housemates, Debbie Gay, April Moore, and Barbara Joseph. We're here today to honor Chester's memory and his friendship. Many other Pooh Placers, as we called ourselves, both housemates and friends of the house, joined together to remember Chester in a Zoom memorial service on Chester's birthday, January 21st, earlier this year. Pooh Place holds an affectionate place in our hearts because the generous and supportive nature of housemates helped move us to a friendship that has continued beyond our time of sharing a home. Our friendship also was strengthened by many traditions that developed over the years that supported the amiable and cooperative spirit of Pooh Place. These included shared meals almost every weeknight and many festive celebrations. Chester and his qualities were all instrumental in these shared traditions. I remember how Chester's musical talent and his love of music often filled the house. One of our treasured traditions was a celebration of the Christmas holiday. Following dinner together, we would gather around our candlelit Christmas tree, yes, real candles, with a pail of water nearby just in case, to sing carols under the accompaniment of Chester on the piano. Though specifics have faded over the years, I have memories of other spontaneous sing-alongs with groups of us standing around the piano in the dining room as Chester played. At other times, Chester would just sit down at the piano and play. I always enjoyed those sounds as they filled the house. I also fondly remember Chester's participation in a madrigal group and seeing him in appropriate medieval attire for the performance, and going to see him in the group in performance. I am grateful that his love for music, combined with his writing skills, led to a long and award-winning career with Symphony Magazine, which I believe was very fulfilling for him, and which also helped lead him to meeting Mary Ann and the loving relationship that ensued. Chester's wit, humor, and knowledge was a major contribution to the memorable nature of our shared dinners. Our wide-ranging dinner conversations often led to questions about the origin of things and to word etymology. On such occasions, I remember Chester pulling out his personal copy of the complete Oxford Dictionary of the English Language to add authoritative knowledge to the subject or the word at hand. Though I cannot remember for sure, I think Chester stored that dictionary on the top of the piano, close to the dinner table, another example of how his music and knowledge encapsulated his contributions to the spirit of the house. A great example of Chester's wit was shared by a friend of our house, Fred Brewster, during our email communications for Chester's memorial. Fred remembered, when he and I were riding to his home in Cambridge, he asked me what I would do when I got home to Kittery Point, Maine. I said that I needed to cut a Christmas tree. Chester's response, "Oh, so you haven't finished your Christmas chopping." Two other examples of the cheer he brought to the dinner table and to the house. One evening, Chester initiated a round of humor around banking terminology that had all of us taking turns at catchy one-liners and laughing hysterically. On several occasions, Chester responded to requests to sing the Elements song by Tom Lehrer. As I remember it, the request often was made to help entertain a dinner guest or guests. Chester never failed to give a flawless rendition, chiming from memory all 102 chemical elements known at the time in perfect cadence and never missing an element. Other memories I have, hiking with Chester on our house trips to Potomac Appalachian Trail Club cabins. His generosity with his Volvo whenever one of us, including me, Carla's housemates, needed a vehicle for some reason. Saturday trips to Heckinger's, the local equivalent of Lowe's and Home Depot at that time. His listening to supportive when I was starting a new job, softball teammate, and importantly, the conversations that made clear to me his loving care for his family. While the details of this remembrance may be off due to the passing of years, I do think that they capture Chester's spirit and the ways that he enriched the lives of all of us who were fortunate to have lived with him and counted him as a trusted friend. Marianne, as you grieve Chester's loss, I hope these remembrances from before you know him will add to the love you have for him and be a source of strength and peace, even as you miss him so much. To Hannah, Corey, Rachel, Dinah, all family, all people who have known and loved Chester over the years, I hope that these memories will give you some sense of comfort and joy in knowing the fullness of this part of Chester's life. And just in case you were wondering what Pooh character Chester chose to be, let that be officially recorded here as part of the legacy we remember today. As we all dressed up as Pooh characters to attend a memorable Halloween party at another group house, Chester chose the heffalump for his costume. Whether or not he knew it at the time, his choice of the heffalump was truly appropriate for him. In preparation for these remarks today, I checked Wikipedia to see what it had to say about the heffalump. As it turns out, there's an orchestral score called To Catch a Heffalump, published in 1971 by Wilhelm Friedrich Bond. And the Swedish newspaper Expressen created an annual literary prize named the Heffalump Award, awarded to the year's best Swedish author for children and young adults. Even in the choice of his Pooh character, Chester was in sync with his orchestral and literary spirit. To close, I think I like to say that Chester had love for all of us. And he helped to build the harmony that we have come to know and love at Pooh Place. As we grieve his loss today, may his life that we remember, celebrate, and honor today also be a source of fond memories, joy, and peace for all of us that have loved him, enjoyed his friendship, and benefited from his kindness and generous spirit.
We pray. Almighty and faithful Creator, all things are of your making. All people are shaped in your image. We now entrust the soul of Chester Lane to your goodness. In your infinite wisdom and power, work in him your merciful purpose, known to you alone from the beginning of time. Console the hearts of those who love him in the hope that all who trust in you will find peace and rest in your kingdom. We ask this in the name of Jesus the Lord. Amen. I want to thank you all very much for coming to this beautiful service today. Thank you for the words. Thank you for the beautiful expressions today. And we close with our organ, is it? A postlude? Thank you. Thank you all.